It's an interim update on the project, but it's close to the final stages of first reporting on the project. So it's really critical to hear those insights now, and to hear back from you on how we can bring the project home, how the team can bring the project home in the most effective ways possible in the final stages. So in particular, we'll want to hear from you either later in this meeting or via email follow up with the project team or in other ways about how the findings might be used in order to best approach the final analysis and the presentation of the results at this stage of the project, but also to potentially inform future analyses and work that might be done. So in short, as you'll see, there's a huge amount of data that's been generated through this project. And so at this stage, we're really seeking your thoughts, insights and feedback on what is most key to know as an immediate priority or set of priorities, as well as what we might hope to learn from the accounts in the medium and longer term, and really particularly how they might be used, because we don't want our research expertise going to generating accounts that sit on dusty shelves. We really want these to be used in practice for all sorts of purposes. So in order to facilitate that discussion after the main presentation, we've got a panel of researchers and policy analysts who will be speaking to the results and kicking off a broader discussion before we move into the wider Q&A. So please think of your questions and your comments as you listen in the discussion. Feel free to post them in the chat, but please hold off on asking them, and we'll address them hopefully later after we've heard from our speaker, and hopefully some of them will also be addressed along the way in the discussion. But without further ado, we're going to start now with a presentation from Michael Vardon, who has been driving this project. He's an associate professor at the ANU and one of the world's leading experts in environmental accounting. He's worked in countries from Australia to Zambia and many, many countries in between, and he's provided advice to the World Bank, the United Nations, and to a wide range of policy, technical and working committees, frameworks and programs along the way. So he's got to situate this particular work within its broader policy context and give us an overview of what he's done, what he and the team have done to date, as well as presenting a case study to demonstrate how the accounts produced can be used in practice to help kick us off on our discussion. So over to you, Michael.
Trap number one, unmute yourself. Thank you very much, Rachel, for that introduction, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and with apologies to some people, because I know many people will know some of the background, but not everyone will know everything. So I'm going to quickly go through what is ecosystem accounting, what is Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, what are Box-gum Grassy Woodlands, then I'm going to get to what we did, how we did it, and some of the results, and then what's possible. And as Rachel said, we don't want this to sit on a shelf. We want to see how we can make this work and make this work for people. I'll get the hang of this. Firstly, environmental economic accounting. What is it? Well, it's a big set of guidelines. These are three very big books. System of National Accounts is for economic information. The System of Environmental Economic Accounts is for integrating environmental with economic information. System of National Accounts is famous for giving us the metric GDP. Okay. Environmental economic accounts tries to link into this information so that we can make sense of the economic information with environmental information. Been very lucky. The System of Environmental Economic Accounting, or the SEA, we'll call it for short, has been in development for 20 years. First version was available in 1993 following the Rio conference in 1992. Took until 2012 to get the central framework standardised, and then at the same time we had a system of ecosystem accounting, but it was experimental. What's happened this year is the United Nations, 193 countries got together and agreed we can now take the word experimental out and we can now go for it. Now, some of the people in Australia were key behind this, DAWE, ABS, and a particular thank you to Carl Obst, the editor of this document. But it really was a massive effort to get this. To get 193 countries to agree to anything can be difficult. What are the flows we're looking at? We're looking at things coming from the environment into the economy: fish, water, minerals. looking at things going around inside the economy, how that goes, and then we're looking at the stuff that goes back out, air emissions, solid waste, water pollution, whatever it is. In all of this, we also have capital. So the environment is the natural capital. It comes in and it goes out. You can have it there, you can have the forests, it can become timber and we can use it. What we're doing now is we're looking at more than the extraction of resources, we're seeing at what else the environment can do for us. Very quickly on accounting, what is accounting? I mean, it is recording of transactions. That's what accountants do. But just remember these few things that we're trying to measure stocks, we're trying to measure flows, we're going to do it in physical terms, we're going to do it in money, we're going to see who benefits and who the beneficiaries are. So if we think of a dam, there is water in the dam. That's our stock of water. Water flows into the dam from the river coming upstream, flows out of the dam into a pipe, into our houses where we drink it. And there's a physical volume that arrives at our house, and then we pay money for that water in the ACT, Icon Water. So I benefit, and I benefit by not dying. If I don't have water, I will die. That's an ultimate thing. But in all of this, three pairs of concepts, stocks and flows, physical and monetary, benefits and beneficiaries. The other key part of this is it's spatial. This becomes critical to our whole things. Where things happened is important. What do accounts look like? I love accounts. Tables, lots and lots of tables. System of national accounts, 69 tables get produced every 12 months. Yeah, there's a lot of work goes into it. They're all interconnected. Not just tables, spatial, particularly ecosystem accounting, we've put it into maps. People like to see maps. You can do things in all sorts of ways. You can then visualize where it happens. The other key thing is you do it again and again and again and again and again. The same way, using the same concepts. The methods might change. The national accounts have been compiled since 1953. They're still being compiled today. How they're compiled, the methods used have changed a lot. The concepts have remained constant. There has been some tinkering around at the sides, but it's been done using the same concepts. Now, accounting can be used in policy, in the policy cycle. Here's a classic policy cycle. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this now. Some thought has gone into this. We can see it being used in some countries and in some places. We need to do more. And this is where we get to what can we do it for in Australia? And maybe we can help protect the environment. At the Commonwealth level, we have the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. I've left out the conservation in the title, but it's there. Apologies. 1,000 pages of fine print. But the key one, promote, see in this thing, the object of the Act, to promote the conservation of biodiversity. That is key. The Act does an awful lot. Okay, does all of these things. As I said, 1,000 pages of fine print. We'll get the lawyers run through it and tell us what to do. Thank you to my colleague, Peter Burnett, for the loan of some of his slides too, just while we're talking of this. We're talking about threatened species and ecological communities. The Boxgum Grassy Woodlands is one of those 85 threatened ecological communities, and it's critically endangered. Can the accounts help the Boxgum Grassy Woodlands? So I'm calling them Boxgum Grassy Woodlands for short. There's its long title. I'm not even going to try to read it. It is a mouthful. There's too many hyphens and clauses. I don't know. But it was listed, and it was listed in 2009. The key thing, it's got boxgum trees, eucalyptus, and it has an understory of native of grasses, herbs, and scattered shrubs. So there must be ground layer underneath it. It must be more than 0.1 hectare, or it must be greater than 2 hectares with things regenerating. So there's a couple of little things to how this is defined in the listing. I've got 2 pictures there. Now, these are both potentially Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. The one on the right, I think, looks like what we might think was a Boxgum Grassy Woodland. There's trees, there's shrubs, there's a thing. The one at the top looks more like a paddock with a tree in it, okay? But that paddock in a tree was a boxgum grassy woodland and could become a boxgum grassy woodland. So is it a boxgum grassy woodland in very bad condition or an agricultural paddock in a good condition? Similarly, on the right, is this a boxgum grassy woodland in good condition and something that could be used for agriculture in a poor condition? There's a couple of different perspectives that we can look at this. Sorry to talk quickly and race through, but I've got a big slide deck, like a true academic. Why is it critically endangered? Well, we've lost most of it. 90% has been lost. There was a national recovery plan done in 2011. It set out a whole lot of things which could be done, which should be done, put in a budget. It said all the right things. It gave us a definition to work with. That's up on the right. How do we define a boxgum grassy woodland? Just a yes, no tree diagram. All very good. Included a lot of other information, including the endangered species which occurred within the woodlands. And just in looking at the birds, it'll become clearer while we're looking at the birds a bit later, 3 have gone from endangered to critically endangered that occur in the boxgum grassy woodlands. So the species in the boxgum grassy woodlands, at least 3 of them aren't doing particularly well. What can we do? So what can we do with the accounts? Well, we can see how much of it there is. We can see the direction of change if we do it over time. We can use our asset accounts of the extent and condition of the boxgum grassy woodlands to calculate ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, for example. We can relate it to economic information, and we can figure out where people have spent money on trying to restore the woodlands and relate it to the condition of woodlands. Once again, we'll come back to that. It is all good, and we can use it, we think, to help governments and others make investment decisions. And these can relate then to the micro level accounts. There's a lot of work being done at the farm level, but the farm level work needs to be seen into context. Okay, the farms are dependent not only on what they do, but what on their neighbours do and how they fit into the landscape. So the other thing about farm level accounts, they're very resource intensive to produce, and according to the ABS, there are about 90,000 farms in Australia. I think it'll take a little while for 90,000 farms to each do their own. I mean, I hope they do, but it might take us a little while to get there. One of, I think, the key things, or not the key, a key thing the accounts do is they make us reconcile the data. There is a lot of data around, and there really is spatial data sets from many, many different sources. We've then got other data sets. We've got data from the ABS and ABARES, which is located at a broad spatial area, but it's there. We've got a lot of methods. There's a lot of off-the-rack methods. There's more and more coming on. We can use several models to model ecosystem services and even to produce accounts. But it really is a train wreck of data and models. And in this, a lot of information has been drawn together and a lot of different methods have been used. So what did we find out? Well, firstly, we had to figure out what the data was and what it meant. And we did quite a lot of cross-classifications of data sets to see what meant what and how different things changed over time. We have a lot of data for one particular year, but we don't have time series of data. What we're lucky is we now, with the Digital Earth Australia, we can do annual land cover. And here we've cross-classified a version of the Digital Earth Australia land cover that was done by Albert van Dyck at the Australian National University by the version which has been released by Geoscience Australia. And what we've found is that they're reasonably concordant. The difference is Geoscience have released it for 2 years. They plan to release it for more, but we've done it for 18 years. So we went with our data. May not be perfect, but we've got a time series. And voila, there's the answer. we've got a little bit more Boxgum Grassy Woodlands, or to perhaps be more accurate, we think we are likely to have a little bit more Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. 57,000 hectares more. I'd love to be able to put a confidence interval on that, okay? Because of the road accident of data, it is very hard. We have to unwind some models, and some of the people that built the models are no longer around to ask how that we got them. So we've done our best, and we can see, you know, what can happen. This is our likely area. We will be doing a methods paper so people can check it and hopefully be able to recreate some of what we did. Now we've got maps of the areas. We did it for 2001, 2017, and every year in between. This is for Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. Now we did this for 1.3 million square kilometres. It's a very big area when you can see. Some of these areas only have a little bit of Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. Some of those areas in Queensland, for example. But this is an area twice the size of France. Okay, it's close to the size of, well, it's very close to the size of South Australia. We're talking about a big area. Okay, we can tell what it was at the beginning, we can tell what it was at the end, and through some nice spatial analysis, we can see where it's changed. Apologies here to the people who might be red-green colourblind. It's been pointed out that they may not be able to interpret this. But what we see is the green, where the dark green where there's been no change, light green where there's been positive change, and then red, which is really hard to see because the red is the change where it's gone from being a Boxgum Grassy Woodland to being something else. We're going to take a bit of a closer look at that in a couple of case studies in a minute. We've got this for all of the NRM regions where we predict to have Boxgum Grassy Woodland. So we've done separate tables and accounts for all of these 27 regions. As you can see, there's some good news stories up the top in Victoria, okay, some slightly bad news stories. And then we've got the ACT where there's no big change. Okay, so I can see there's a typo there. Yeah, anyway, we'll come back to that. New South Wales did not have 186% decrease. So apologies to my colleagues in New South Wales. But let's just have a look at two of these areas. So we're taking the Glenelg Hopkins in Victoria, which had quite a big increase in that. So we can see here, the purple, that's where Boxgum Grassy Woodlands is likely to occur. We could field test this. We can go out and measure it and see if it's a Boxgum Grassy Woodland according to the definition of the EPBC Act. We can then have a look at Dubbo. And so there's also, at the Central West where Dubbo is. I put the towns in just so that people might get a bit of a feel for where these places are. And you can see there's a lot of Boxgum Grassy Woodland. These are national parks by and large up here. So lots of it occurs already in national parks. Okay, we can then once again do the changes. And what we see here is lots of green popping up. So what's going on in Glenelg Hopkins that's not going on up here in the Central West? We can see here, you start to see all these little bits of red where it's changing. What's causing that change? We don't really know, but we know where it's happening and we could go and check. One thing we could do. So let's just have a look at the ACT. ACT, once again, a lot of effort gone into comparing the data. Yuqing Chen, thank you very much. He's done a lot of great graphics, a lot of great comparisons. Here we have a local land cover map compared with one generated by an international system from Aries. Very nice system. There are other ones as well. We just did a comparison to see what it looked like. And it works without being exact. The key message from that, the local data works better. But that's to be expected. We've got here a change in the ACT. We've got a little bit more Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. We can see here the fires in 2003 caused a bit of a change. 2003 here, it goes down. And we also see that it goes up and down between the years. Why is that? A lot of it's by canopy cover. The remote sensing does it by canopy cover. When it's a wet year, you get more growth, you get more canopy cover. So more gets picked up as a woodland rather than a shrubland or something else. We can do an account. You can put in the top row, opening stock. We can put in the bottom row, closing stock. We can even have a net change. What we can't do is attribute the changes. In the CSIRO accounts, you have to have the managed, people did it, or natural, just happened by itself. There's also something called upward and downward reappraisals. That's where how you measure it, if you change how you measured it, that's where you put that number, because it can just be due to change in measurement techniques. Certainly with spatial data, when you go from a 300-metre resolution to a 30-metre resolution, you get a changed answer. So that's where we would put that sort of information. The next best thing to a proper account, accounting for change, is what's called a change matrix. These can be hard to interpret, but we'll just have a look down here. We'll just lead you quickly across the rows. This is what has become Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. So it was water, and 2 hectares became Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. Okay, interesting to know where that was. We had no vegetation. The minus, we lost 38 areas to something called no vegetation. We then had short vegetation. This is where we got the big gains. 751 hectares came in from short vegetation. And then 14 hectares of forest became Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. To arrive at the overall minus this, plus this, this and this, and you get the answer. So we know what became what. We don't know what caused it in some cases. We can take a good stab at it, which we'll do shortly. We can also use these spatial data to then model ecosystem services. For example, carbon sequestration. And this isn't exactly carbon sequestration, but this is the gross carbon uptake for the ACT. We then would have to take into account fires which reduce carbon and take that off. We then also need to add in carbon storage as an ecosystem service. So climate regulation has 2 parts, carbon sequestration and carbon storage. It was a very nice proposal by Heather Keith to the CSIRO to combine them both. And I think it's still probably the best solution, but we will check out that and we'll test that with real data. The other thing is these are models based on remotely sensed data. We need to calibrate them. We need to go out and get field data to make the models work better. So, ACT case study. Now, that was a Boxgum Grassy Woodland. It certainly looks to me like it might have no vegetation now. We will explore this in a minute. Very easy to tell. I'm just showing you here a picture of North Canberra. ACT has a wealth of information online. It's great. You can download it, you can see it. It's fantastic. The web link's up there. Check it out. Yeah, other states have some. It's not quite as intuitive in some cases, but you know, this platform is great, which made my job a lot easier. So here's Canberra in 1966. Some of us were alive then. So we have Ainslie down here, the Australian National University sitting somewhere off here. We have what's here, the suburb, or what will become the suburb called Watson. At the moment, it's a collection of sheep paddocks in 1966. Okay, scroll forward to 2004. And we have, this is Watson now in 2004 on the left, 2019 on the right. Look at where those arrows are. We had what looks like a sheep paddock and has now got houses on it. Have a look at this other area. We have what looks like a Boxgum Grassy Woodland on the left, and we have a housing development on the right. And that's where we can see, you know, what has gone on. We can then also see we have this other area just here. So in 2004, scattered trees, another Boxgum Grassy Woodland. 2019, it looks a lot better. Okay, we're going to come back to that. So that's the Justice Robert Hope Park. That's an important part of this little puzzle. Oh, there's my bit to save climate change. So, excuse me for that. It's not as bad as the computer shutting down or freezing up, or maybe somebody would like me to. No, sorry, it was just refreshing. So once again, there's a lot of spatial data available for that. There's a lot of spatial data for most places in the country. The challenge is to put it together. Okay, so here we've got the ECNES, Ecological Communities of National Environmental Significance. It's a model developed by what's become DAWE, where Boxgum Grassy Woodlands is likely to occur. We've then taken a bunch of other information and done our own prediction of where it's likely to occur. And the answer is, well, it works, at least for Watson. So these dark grey and purple areas certainly are Boxgum Grassy Woodlands by the definition. You know, last year was COVID, couldn't go very far. I could literally walk out the back door and check the predictions of the model. What we'd love to be able to do is to check the predictions more comprehensively. Now we're getting into what does the land cover look like. So when we do the land cover, what we find, this is Watson, and Watson comes out as sparse woody vegetation. Doesn't come out as an urban area. And if you look from the top of Mount Majura across Canberra, it's quite amazing. You see more trees than houses or roads. So this gets to some important issues coming on when we go to urban accounts and what trees do for urban areas, which is quite a lot. So I'm going to come back to that area which I pointed out, which cleared out. So here, where the red arrow is, and I'm wiggling the pointer, that 3 hectares was deemed under the EPBC Act to be a Boxgum Grassy Woodland. Justice Robert Hope Park is also a Boxgum Grassy Woodland. There was they were able to clear under the Act this 3 hectares. So you could lose those 3 hectares provided you managed these 19 hectares better. There's a few other conditions, but essentially you've traded 3 hectares of extent for 19 hectares of improved condition. Was that a good and fair trade? Okay, well, according to the Commonwealth, it was. And maybe it's something that we can discuss. Is that worth it? It certainly was. The ACT has done a fantastic job managing that. The condition is much better. Remember our air photos? The air photos showed it regenerating. They've got a lot of information there. They do weed control, they do pest control, they do annual monitoring. They do everything they were told to do. Okay, probably more. And they produce these nice reports and they're on the website every year. And I wish we could have a report like that for every 19 hectare plot of Boxgum Grassy Woodland in the country. When they cleared the area, you're also required to preserve the trees. The big trees, so these trees are within this area, and this is one of them in Watson, which was preserved, but the people on the right want to chop it down because it poses a danger to their building. It also could pose a danger to human safety as well, and they want to cut it down. Okay, so the tree's been there for 350 years, approximately. The building's been there for 4 or 5, maybe. Okay, if we remove that tree, we're saying that that tree is worth less than the potential damage that it will cause to that building or other buildings. We're getting a value, an exchange value. I don't think the ACT government will land. There's a Tree Protection Act. We'll see what happens to that tree, but in the Canberra Times, you can look it up. There's stuff going on. We're lucky that somebody's actually valued trees in Canberra. This is out to the west of Canberra, still a Boxgum Grassy Woodland. The picture's from the north of Canberra, but I like it. It's easy for me to take. And they have said that a tree in West Canberra, where it's being developed, is worth $170,000 in terms of the area you have to set aside from development. Okay. Now, who wears that cost is an interesting question. Is it the developer or the ACT government or the people buying the houses? We'll set that aside, but the area that the tree is in, not available for development, is worth around $170,000, or it was in 2019. On to New South Wales, very big area, lots of likely boxgum grassy woodland, but losing some boxgum grassy woodland. So we have a big percentage decline in the north coast, but there's hardly any there anyway. We have a big decline in the central west, 45,000 hectares. Okay, large falls in other places, but we can also see some other things, a good news story within some of these bad news stories. So you're losing it in some places, you're gaining it in others, but on the whole, there's been a net loss. And we can do this for each. Apologies to my colleagues in New South Wales for calling it a CMA. It should be a local land service. I should have used NR, Natural Resource Management Region, to not offend anyone. So apologies. We can then look, and in the CSIRO it calls them combined presentations. I think they're very good, but it's much easier to see it in graphic form. And here we've gone for the gross value of agricultural production on land used mainly for agricultural production. And what we can see is that you get $595 gross from the Riverina. It's not bad. What we see in the Central West, which has the largest fall, you get $224 per hectare. What does that mean? Well, maybe it means that if we could find a way for farmers to earn more than $224 per hectare more, we might be able to convince them to keep boxgum grassy woodland or restore boxgum grassy woodland. Would certainly be a lot cheaper than paying $170,000 for a tree in Canberra. We're then getting into offsets, which is another area. But all of this, we're getting to where we can try to make some exchanges, which is what I think the accounts allow us to do, to make trade-offs. We can do them in time and in space and between different groups of people. Coming back, this is a good news story in an area north of Corowa. We have two areas, both in reserves, one's a state forest, the other one's a flora park, and we have what's called a paper road in the middle. And what we can see is there's a little bit of boxgum grassy woodland there. And we can also see there's some other vegetation which could become boxgum grassy woodland if it's properly cared for. Okay, so paper roads, these are areas set aside for roads which never came to be. Travelling stock routes is another one. There is an opportunity to at least do that. If we could connect up to these two pieces, maybe we'd get a good conservation outcome. And there's other work that suggests that it is better to restore what's degraded rather than to start from scratch. Chugging along and going really well. Now, getting back to the birds, which we mentioned earlier, and thanks very much to Cass from the ANU for doing this work. He's got a predictive tool. He can predict where birds are going to be. So for this area over here, he's predicted the likely occurrence of about 65 different birds. We could then check them off against the endangered species list. We could then try to predict what would happen if we created a patch in between. We can do this with an understory. Sorry, the model can predict on several things, but two of the key variables, is there a shrub understory and are there noisy miners or not? An interesting question in biodiversity accounting is that some species are not desirable. We could probably all agree that having rabbits in the paddock are a bad thing. Okay, we'd probably say that having boxgum grassy woodlands is a good thing, but not if you're in South Africa. So it's all context. Anyway, we can do some nice modelling work. What I think the key is, it's really hard to tell. We can tell the sudden change in Watson. It goes from being a boxgum grassy woodland to not. Straight out we can see it determined under the Act, an explicit trade-off made. What we're not seeing And what's not controlled under the Act is the gradual decline and decay of the Boxgum Grassy Woodlands across a wide area. You can't tell that. You can tell it where it might be happening, where it's likely to happen, and we can go and check it. But those areas aren't being monitored every year. They're not being checked and they're not subject to the Act. Don't fit the definition. So, one, we need to measure things on the ground, and what we can do is the remote sensing and modelling can help tell us where we should be monitoring. Where is the greatest change and what's causing it? It just then becomes a sampling problem. And what's great is in Canada, they gave the Stats Bureau there 26 million Canadian dollars to do an environmental census every 5 years. I bet the ABS would love that, as would Geoscience Australia and CSIRO and others. It would be great to have that sort of money available to do systematic monitoring, not just of Boxgum Grassy Woodlands, but of everything. Back to my friend Peter Bennett from the law school. He's called it the 1-2 punch. So we had the National Auditor Office say the EPBC Act is not effective. Oh, bad, straight right. Maybe it's a straight left. I'm not good at boxing. Here we go. There's the right hook. The independent review by Graham Samuels said environment is in overall decline and under increasing threat. The Act is not working. We've got to do something. And it was very lovely of Mr. Samuel to say that environmental accounts are part of the solution. I agree with him. So, what's possible? What we think we can do is that governments can use the information here to decide where to invest. If you have conservation dollars, where can you get the maximum return for conservation for the dollars you are going to spend? Okay, we can, and that can be where. So where do you need it? How much do you need becomes the questions, and then it's just problem, how much money can we get the most for the least? So it can be used to prioritise investment as well by the governments and by others. Now here, a lot of the work is being done on the ecosystem services. One of the key areas, I think, is that by investing in natural capital on farms, you actually increase the capital value of farms. So you may see changes in service, particularly increased growth in cattle, better crop tonnes per hectare, all of that. But there is also a capital value increase, and there have been some nice studies that show there is an optimal level of native vegetation to have, which increases the value of the farm. So it's nice. The other one, we can integrate this with existing long-term monitoring data, which we're very lucky to have at the ANU. Sometimes I say ABS, but it's all Australia. We're all one big happy family. We can use the data that we've got to check out some of the things and see what's driving change. We can test our predictions. We can test our models. We need to calibrate them. And I would really love to get to full biodiversity counts, not just status, but there was some very nice work done by the ACT government, the involvement of the ABS and ANU on how you account for butterflies. A very nice little study, which I'd recommend to you. Getting to valuation. I keep talking about capital values, natural capital. We can test some of this with data from the Valuer General. Keep going on. There are some other things which can be done with valuation. That really is the next step. How do you put a price on some of these things? Here, we really do want to get to something called exchange value. It's not what you think it's worth, it's what it's actually worth, demonstrated by the transactions you make. So you're not allowed to cut down the trees in West Belconnen. That's a $170,000 transaction that didn't happen. Okay. If they chop down the tree in Watson, then that's a transaction that did happen. That tree must be worth less than the damage or risk it is having to the buildings and people that surround it. We can measure those. Getting now to what is it really? I think the key thing is we can do it. We can build accounts. Yes, they're complicated, but there's a lot of data and there's a lot of people that can help out and do this. You need a lot of different professions involved. You need a lot of different agencies involved. There's a lot of data. No one knows it all. You really do need a team. Rachel introduced it as a team. Many people are involved in this, and we've got the data which is publicly available from many people. We can't do it without all of that. So to build accounts, cooperation is essential. To use accounts and figure out how they can best be used, which is why we're coming to people here and getting to the discussion, which I know I've run over time, but Rachel's been very generous with me. So I will hand back to Rachel now, and hopefully you can keep your questions in mind for the next half an hour or so.
That's right. Thanks, Michael. And I think that was a pretty comprehensive run through some fairly comprehensive work that's been done to date, and a good taster for what we can hope to expect from the accounts into the future. In order to sort of warm up our discussion and really understand and contextualise the value of this work, we're going to go to our panel now. And first up, we have Becky Schmidt. Becky Schmidt is a senior environmental scientist at CSIRO Land and Water, based in Canberra, and she has done work that spans sectors from agriculture and mining through to water and conservation, spans disciplines from ecology and hydrology to economics and environmental informatics, and among many other things she is leading CSIRO's contribution to the strategy and action plan on a common national approach to environmental economic accounting. So Becky, can you please share some of your thoughts and reflections on what Michael's presented here?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Michael, for a wonderful talk. I'd first like to echo that with your final slide, that really collaboration is really underpinning, just foundational for all of this work. And so just identify a few opportunities, I think, for collaboration from what you've shown. So I think this has really shown like a real use case for experimental land accounts, and the use of a data set that many of the other people on the panel are working hard to make available to lots of people, and also in classification. So of course, we have the CSIRO reference classification for global comparability, but they acknowledge that there's a need for specialized national classifications. And I think many of the people that are on the line right now, we can very happily work together to talk about ecosystem classifications that work for a variety of different accounts for multiple purposes and users. So I'm going to give just some comments more broadly on two high-level things. One is remote sensing, and then the other is the dynamics of ecosystems. So I think this has really demonstrated a really best practice kind of approach of using remote sensing with on-ground validation. And I'm sure you wrestled and had all sorts of problems with some of the definitions of those woodlands. They're a challenge for everybody. So it's just acknowledging that things like native understory is really a challenge for remote sensing. So that's certainly something going forward would be interesting to explore. And also in the diversity as well. There are landscape scale habitat-based techniques that can give you an idea of the diversity of species, not just one kind of species, but that's something that could combine with this approach that you're doing here to really assist in those kind of rules to look over France, the size of France, to see where those are located. And so my final comment is around just the dynamics of the ecosystems. And yes, and the issue of changing ecosystems and attributing differences. So it's really hard to disentangle the extent and then the condition, as you say, and you need to consider, what's due to natural processes or human actions, as you've been saying. So there are opportunities in another similar project that I'm working with the Murray-Darling Basin and the DAWE, Department of Ag, Water, Environment, and ABS, and others. We have actually attributed using conceptual models of ecosystems that just talk about how an ecosystem changes with time, and have actually come up a way to fill in those managed and unmanaged rows. So there are opportunities to do that, but like you say, there's so much data out there and you really need to wrestle with it and understand as well the condition. So my suspicion is, a lot of the changes or some of the changes are just natural variation. So it's really a rich area to explore going forward, for this and all different kinds of ecosystem types. So thank you. I think I'll leave it to that.
Great, thanks Becky, and we'll come back to you more in the discussion. But over now to Clare McInnes, so providing our first perspective from policy. Clare is the Director of Biodiversity Planning and Policy in the ACT Government. She's primarily responsible for developing policy and plans associated with the protection and management of threatened species and ecological communities, and her work there is informed by 19 years of experience in reserve management, planning and restoration. So she's recently begun investing in the benefits of using environmental accounts to inform policy, specifically relating to the management of living infrastructure in the ACT. So Clare, your thoughts?
Thank you. And yeah, no, that's, I love the presentation. Thank you, Michael, and thanks for the introduction, Becky. So I'm going to talk a little bit from the ACT government's perspective and where we're at in terms of investigating environmental accounts. And to the direction that we're currently heading, and hopefully set the scene, I guess, for a bit of discussion about next steps for us and opportunities. But really, you know, the ACT government has in recent years started investigating the use of environmental accounts to inform policy and investment. Most recently, EPSDD, so Environmental Planning Sustainable Development Directorate, for those not from the ACT, has engaged a CSIRO to undertake initial investigation into the value or valuing living infrastructure. So specifically in that instance, urban trees and irrigated open space, and that was back in 2019. And a little bit earlier than that, the Office of the Commissioner of Sustainable Environment also undertook a pilot study back in 2017. It is, however, a space that we're in, you know, both made a commitment to invest in further, and we've recently, well, a couple of years ago, launched a living infrastructure plan, which includes an action to undertake further investigation into how we can implement an accounting framework to inform policy and investment in living infrastructures, continuing on from the CSIRO study. And this is, of course, in response to the need to inform the protection of biodiversity in the urban landscape in particular. We have a growing population, and as evidenced by Michael's presentation, there are ongoing development pressures associated with that. To give a little bit more context about development planning in the ACT, so back in 2018, our planning strategy was refreshed with a new commitment that that 70% of new housing would actually be developed within the existing urban footprint. And the reason for this, as stated in that planning strategy, was to create a city that's compact and more accessible and most efficiently uses existing physical and social infrastructure. And so while the strategy also states this would then mean that natural areas outside of the urban footprint will be better preserved, it obviously comes with some incompatibilities within the urban footprint itself, especially around the protection of mature native trees, like what Michael highlighted there, and you know, the Boxgum example being a good example of that one. So what the ACT has done in response to that, recognising that that is going to be an issue, we've released a few strategies, the living infrastructure plan being one of those, the urban forest strategy, which was released just this year, and back in 2018, the loss of mature native trees was listed as a key threatening process, and an action plan is currently almost complete for that one, and we're going out for public consultation in the near future. So each of these strategies and plans include actions aimed at improving how we manage living infrastructure, but they also recognise ecosystem service benefits that living infrastructure provides for the community, you know, whether it be in the face of climate change, as an example, but also protecting biodiversity generally. As I mentioned, we are about to embark on another project investigating use of environmental accounts. And as you know, and to reiterate, the living infrastructure plan includes an action to investigate how we can use an accounting framework specifically to inform policy investment, specifically around the protection management of living infrastructure in the urban environment. And we're just about to commence that work. It's also an opportunity for the ACT government to connect with others, and I'm really pleased actually at the last slide, because that's something that I have become very aware of. That this is indeed a collaborative effort. So while the ACT government is on the interjurisdictional environmental economic accounting steering committee, that's overseeing the delivery of the national strategy and action plan, we're also on the interjurisdictional working group on urban ecosystem accounting, so a working group called Eureka, which I'm a member of. And that's been a fantastic opportunity for me to work with others from Victoria, New South Wales and the Commonwealth to share our collective experiences, to actually develop some guidance notes to inform the development of urban ecosystem accounting, recognising the potential for such accounts to inform environmental policy and investment. For me, this has been a significant learning curve. I've really only just started dabbling in this area since the beginning of, well, sort of late end of last year. But securing investment for environmental management is something that is of great importance to me, and I am quite proud of my past teams working in the environmental offset space here in Canberra. So I was quite pleased that Michael gave us a thumbs up in that space earlier in his presentation. But ultimately, what I'm hoping that this project we're about to embark on will enable us to, I guess, not only test drive the guidance notes that the Eureka team are working on, but actually provide the ACT government an opportunity to enable us to create a product that hopefully we can use to inform the adoption of this more broadly within the ACT. Fingers crossed, and we're just starting this process, so hopefully, yeah, we can get some good outcomes from it.
Great, thank you, Claire, for those thoughts. Next up, we have Jonathan Khoo from the ABS. Jonathan is the Director of the Centre of Environmental and Satellite Accounts at the ABS, and this is the area responsible for the environmental economic accounts produced by the ABS. He's got over 20 years experience working in official statistics, but his area is also supporting the strategy for implementing the Common National Approach to Environmental Economic Accounting. So for those of you who aren't yet aware, that is a large program that is underway, across many organisations in Australia to try to actually build accounts nationally. And so that's really critical work that's underway that's been hinted at by our other presenters so far. So Jonathan's area is one of the key contributors. But over to you, Jonathan, for your thoughts.
Thanks, Rachel. Just checking that you can hear me okay. Great. All right, and thanks to Michael and the team that have done this work. I think it's really great to see the I guess the level of detail that you've been able to go to already to look at these particular areas, and it is a really fascinating sort of case study to see what might be possible with environmental economic accounts. I guess probably the starting point for me is the points that both Becky and Claire have already raised around collaboration. So in my mind, many of you around the call might be sort of saying, well, where does the ABS fit into the picture here? A lot of the issues, particularly around environmental management, particularly at a maybe things, particularly around when you think about the monitoring side of things, might be more in the, I guess, the scientific sort of side of the world. One of the things, I guess, that Michael's already highlighted is the importance of environmental economic accounting, not just within Australia, but also internationally as well. So there's many people around that I can see that I recognise on the call that have contributed to the CSIRO ecosystem accounting standards. For those of you who aren't aware, those have been recently revised and endorsed by the United Nations Statistical Commission, and there's a range of people both here and internationally who've contributed to that process. So I wanted to just sort of acknowledge that that collaboration is that Michael and Becky and Claire have all highlighted is something that is fundamental for future development in this sort of space. A couple of things, other things from an ABS perspective that Michael kind of hinted at, but I just thought I'd also highlight. Michael mentioned the system of national accounts, which kind of sits across the top of all of our macroeconomic statistics and produces things like GDP and other things that like that. that provides, I guess, the broad framework for what we're trying to look at here, but it also, that overarching framework, you know, allows us to provide some of those accounting aspects that we can start to look at. So when Michael talks about things like transactions and things like that, those are things that certainly come to mind to me. The other thing I was just going to mention from an ABS perspective that the presentation talked a little bit about is things like data management, data collection, and thinking a little bit about how we might be disseminating complex pieces of data and work. So I think that that's certainly something that's really critical, particularly when we're thinking about those, not just measuring things one-off, but thinking on things on an ongoing basis, as Michael also alluded to. So a couple of comments that I was just going to talk about in the context of the presentation. The first comment I was going to make in a broad sense was around this idea of policy need and scale of the accounts that we are producing. So you know, I guess one of the things that that I guess I'm keen to try to think about in this space is to understand, can we produce a national ecosystem account? And if we can, what would that look like? How would it actually be useful for people? And those questions are going to be really critical to understand, well, some of those other aspects around, well, what will be the appropriate scale that we need to produce the accounts at, and how would we go about doing that on an ongoing, consistent basis? You know, some of the things that Michael has talked about in his presentation really got to the heart of some of those issues and some of the specific questions that Michael was talking about in terms of things like offsets, for example. You know, being able to sort of demonstrate some of those things is going to be really important. But also, if we're trying to look at, say, a national picture of whether our ecosystems are improving or not improving, some of the information that may be possible to get across Australia, which is obviously a really difficult country when you compare perhaps to other countries across the world around trying to capture that information, will be something that we'd need to think about. So, you know, what's that sort of scale in terms of the spatial unit of measurement that you're thinking about? The other thing as well that's important in that space is around what are some of the national scale data sets that you might need. Some of the things like that Michael mentioned, like land cover, are starting to be reduced on an ongoing basis, and that's great to see. And certainly when I think about some of the other work that we're thinking about in this space, like experimental land accounts, those are some of the elements that I think would be underpinning some of our national efforts in the future. But I'd sort of also highlight that particularly compared to information that we might collect for other sort of phenomena that are happening in the economic and social space, geospatially enabling data sets can be quite challenging, and so making sure that we're able to do that in a way which is repeatable is an ongoing challenge. The other thing I was going to mention in the I guess that broader space is around the point that Becky made around the classifications and application to thinking about the Australian environment. So again, I think, you know, the international guidance in this space is obviously really important to make sure that we're able to do things which are internationally comparable, but at the same time, we need to make sure they work for us and our specific policy needs as well. So I think that's where it's really critical to understand and make sure that what we're doing in that space is consistent with what we're wanting from a policy perspective. Second point I was going to make that Michael alluded to is one that I guess that has interested me for a while in the ecosystem accounting space, and that's around the idea of extent change versus a change in condition. This in my mind is a really important one. I think of it more from an accounting context. So again, Michael made the point around you know, is this a box? Looking at a couple of pictures and said, is this a Boxgum Grassy Woodland which is of poor condition, or is this a piece of agricultural land which is of a high condition? And I guess the answer may depend on which aspect that you're looking at, but I think those are actually quite important questions when we are starting to think about, you know, what the interpretation you might be taking from an accounting context, and how that would flow through to some of the numbers that Michael showed, because some things might show up as changes in condition, which would then impact on, you know, monetary measures of things like degradation, if we were to go to that sort of level of detail to calculate, and some of them may not, depending on the way that you would work those out. So those sorts of decisions are quite difficult to work through here, but I think are really critical, because from an interpretation perspective will actually have real implications in terms of what outputs you might have from the set of accounts. So I think that's an issue that I you know, Michael sort of touched on, but it'd be worthwhile. I'd be keen to get his thoughts based on the experiences that he's had so far in this study to work through that. And I guess my final comment was just one that sort of came to mind when Michael was giving the presentation. And I guess one of the, you know, Michael, you talked a little bit about the ecosystem services that are related to carbon, like carbon sequestration and storage in the context of Boxgum Grassy Woodlands. But I'm keen to sort of see whether you had any thoughts about other types of services as well, and the experiences that you may have had through this process. Because again, thinking about it from a national perspective, one of the things you'd need to think about is what are the types of services that you think we should be measuring across the whole of Australia, which again will be different depending on which ecosystems you're looking at. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. And we'll come back to those questions in just a moment. But before we do, I just want to go to our final panellist. Dayani Gunawardana is in the Commonwealth Government, the Australian Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, and she's Assistant Director in the Environmental, Economic and Accounts section. She's worked for many years on national policy and programs designed to improve the environmental information available to decision makers, and her current role involves implementation of the National Strategy for Environmental Economic Accounting, with a specific focus on delivering ecosystem accounts to address policy issues and challenges at regional and national scales. So I think it'll be incredibly useful to hear from you, Di, about your insights from a national policy perspective.
Thanks, Rachel. And thank you, Michael. A really interesting presentation. And as Rachel said, I work in the section in the Commonwealth Department, responsible for implementing the National Strategy for Environmental Economic Accounts. And that strategy was agreed in 2018 by all environment ministers. So through that strategy, there has been a very high level recognition that accounts can be very useful and could be really useful to help us deal with some of the really big sort of policy challenges and issues that we have in Australia, particularly related to, you know, environmental management. And so how we can maintain and improve the condition of our environment, and by doing that also deliver improved human well-being. And that second part's really key, I suppose, that what accounts do, and ecosystem accounts in particular, really try to link you know, the condition of our ecosystems with the benefits they provide to people. So through our work on the national strategy, we've undertaken a lot of consultations with potential users, and through those we have confirmed that there is this huge potential for accounts. Michael showed one example that was really interesting about looking at the effectiveness of a management intervention in the ACT. And often we as environmental managers, you know, we have interventions in the landscape that are designed to improve biodiversity conservation. But through the accounts, we really are interested in understanding the other benefits. So those interventions potentially cost us money. You know, they cost, the example of that tree costing, you know, the developers, you know, potentially, you know, over $100,000 for a single tree. But the accounts let us look at the benefits we also get from that. So that's a really important part of the picture that's been missing, is that we often see the cost of environmental management, and we haven't done a great job at really measuring and quantifying the benefits we get from an improved environment. So accounts is a really important way to help us tell that bigger picture and those interactions, and then make those trade-off decisions being fully informed about not just the impact on the environment, but if we do choose to do a development, what are the impacts, not just on the environment, but the flow-on impacts that are going to happen for other services that humans did benefit from, the recreation services, the carbon sequestration, etc. So when we make that decision, we're fully informed. So definitely there's been recognised this huge potential for accounts. We do, as Michael's outlined, there's a whole bunch of sort of technical challenges. There's lots of data out there, but bringing it together and making it useful is quite challenging. And like all the other speakers have said, accounts are multidisciplinary. It's really technically challenging. So working all together is so very important. And our role at the department, a big part of it is coordinating and working across government, so across the state and territory governments, but also with the research sector and the non-government sector, to try and deal with some of these technical issues and work through how we can make some really useful accounts. So collaboration, absolutely important. And the other thing that's been a real focus under national strategy is making sure that we build accounts that are really useful, that do inform decisions. And what was I going to say about that? Oh, I was just noting that Michael sort of did quite a good demonstration about how the sort of accounts he's produced are quite widespread, but then they can be used as a bit of a surveillance tool. So they can give us a bit of a broad picture and identify places in the landscape where we think change is happening. And then we can zoom into those and do some more, investigate further and do some more detailed analysis. And I was going to suggest as a next step for this project potentially is working in some of those areas, working with the local managers to really try to apply then what you've learnt in the account. So zooming in, talking to the managers, how can we build on what we know in the accounts to give you something that's really useful in terms of informing your management or policy type intervention. And we're talking about that sort of broadly. It's actually in our strategy is a key part. We don't just produce accounts, but we need to work through how we apply those and work with those end users. And it might be adding in extra data to do that sort of extra bit of analysis that then really makes a product that's really useful to the end user. And the example in the ACT might be one where perhaps Michael can work with the ACT government to help them with their monitoring of some of the programs that they've got underway. Just see. I was just going to comment as well. It's sort of one of the challenges we have. Jono mentioned this and Michael as well about the scale of accounts and how we complement what might be done at quite broad scales or national scale with that sort of more local information and reporting. So that's something that we're sort of working through and thinking about. So interesting to see your reflections on that, Michael, including at that sort of farm scale and how that sort of farm level accounts can link in and be informed by the broader context of accounts. And I think I might leave it at there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Di. And we can always come back to any further thoughts you come up with. But I'm mindful we want to move to response from our broader audience in a moment as well. Particularly, I'm aware that we have people from conservation policy, from ag policy, from environmental accounts policy across a whole bunch of different agencies, people from research, law, from business and others online here. So in terms of thinking about the immediate steps for how these accounts can be finally, drawn together for the first stage report, which is due very, very soon. Sorry, Michael. And then a sort of further, I guess, interim step that can be taken in subsequent months you know, that will be, you know, that our co-funding partners, the Sustainable Farms project, will continue to support and disseminate, and then longer term work that can be done. So we really want to hear about, you know, the value and particularly what kinds of questions you need answered in your decision making, business, you know, management contexts and other things. But Michael, did you want to come back on some of those questions that were raised, particularly by Jonathan, and also on any of the other comments, just briefly before we open up to broader questions? And while he's doing that, please feel free to pop questions in the chat or put your hand up if questions or comments if you have anything to talk about, you know, what the accounts will be useful for you. Thanks, Michael.
Look, thank you, and thank you to Becky, Claire, Jonathan and Di for some very thoughtful comments. I think it was great. I think we all take away it's hard, but it's possible, and we need to collaborate. Jonathan had some accounting questions. I've got some ideas, but I don't have the answer. I wish I did. Becky pointed to the technical problems, you know, or technical issues. You know, they're all there. What can technology solve? You know, here I think technology can work, you know, plus hard work and on ground. Claire was great to cover off the policy, you know, what are the things? There are strategies, there are actions that they are being applied. And that was the same with Di, and I'm very sorry, Di, I should have put in the national strategy because it was a great thing to have. It's all there, this whole notion of who they're useful for and who should produce them for what, I think is a great question. So who should produce farm level accounts? So you get who benefits from farm level accounts? Is it the farmer or is it the public? So if the public benefits from farm level accounts, then there's a reason for public investment in that. If the farmers benefit, well, then they should do it themselves anyway. So what's the additionality, I think, in all of that? I think one of the other points Jonathan made, what happens at scale? How does this get scaled up and down? So farm level accounts are good. Yeah, but it's how do we do that and how do we make it work? And what is the scale that it's most useful? So I'm going to, Jonathan, it gets to levels of aggregation and what's the smallest unit of aggregation which makes sense and can be used analytically. So there's a few little, you know, analytical questions there. But if we had quick, clear policy questions that can be answered by data, I think that would be good. I think this gets back to something that Di was saying. There was also a bit in the chat. We do have to make decisions where we do trade off the environment for human benefits. And that's what the accounts do. They can make these trade-offs explicit. We can see how they're done in space. We can see how they're done over time. We can see how they're done within different groups of society. The accounts are agnostic. They provide the information. People can then add value judgments in to see what is there. And that's what we have governments for, to make a decision in the interests of everybody. We all vote for people and we hope that the people we vote for make decisions which are for the greatest good. So I've rambled on a lot there, but look, thank you. I've written down a lot of things and I'm keen to get into the broader questioning. So thank you.